The whispers of a dying world, setting the stage for disaster. Beneath layers of sand and forgotten ruins lie the whispers of once mighty empires, their stories erased by time. Stone temples still rise from the earth. Cracked roads still trace the paths of ancient trade. But the voices that once filled these spaces, the farmers, the priests, the kings, and the soldiers, are silent. What if those whispers carried a terrifying warning for our own future? Discover the shocking evidence of how brutal climate shifts, not invading armies, brought about the spectacular downfall of advanced societies, leaving behind only desolate monuments to their past glory. And if you're ready to uncover the hidden forces that shaped humanity's past, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and let's begin. History often tells us that civilizations fall because of enemies at the gates, invasions, wars, political betrayal. We are taught to imagine flames on city walls, armies clashing in the streets, and empires collapsing under the weight of human conflict. These dramatic moments dominate our understanding of the past. Yet beneath these visible events lies a quieter, more relentless force, one that does not negotiate, does not retreat, and does not care about human ambition or power: the environment. For most of human history, civilizations thrived only when climate conditions allowed them to. Stable rainfall meant reliable harvests. Predictable seasons allowed societies to plan years in advance, store surplus food, and support growing populations. Entire political systems, religious beliefs, and economic networks were built on the assumption that nature would remain consistent. But nature rarely stays still. When rainfall patterns shifted, when temperatures dropped or rose, and when seasons became unpredictable, the foundations of civilization began to crack. Crops failed, food shortages spread, trade networks collapsed, social tensions rose, and political authority weakened. Even the most sophisticated and powerful systems, carefully constructed over centuries, could unravel with astonishing speed. What if the greatest threat to empires was never war or invasion, but the sky itself? In this video, we will journey through forgotten collapses and hidden patterns in human history. We will examine how sudden climate shifts triggered famine, forced mass migrations, destabilized economies, and ignited social unrest. And ultimately, we will see how nature, time and again, exposed the fragile foundations beneath humanity's greatest achievements. The Bronze Age collapse, a multi-front environmental catastrophe. Around 1200 BCE, the ancient world entered a period of chaos unlike anything seen before. Within the span of just a few generations, powerful Bronze Age civilizations across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East collapsed almost simultaneously. What had once been a tightly connected international system, bound together by trade, diplomacy, and shared technologies, began to unravel at a speed that stunned later historians. The Hittite Empire, once a dominant force in Anatolia with a complex bureaucracy and formidable military, vanished from history. Its capital was abandoned, its records left unfinished. In Greece, Mycenaean palace centers that had served as political, economic, and cultural hubs were burned and never fully restored. Along the eastern Mediterranean coast, prosperous cities like Ugarit were destroyed and left in ruins, their final letters frozen in time, describing imminent disaster and unanswered cries for help. Long-distance trade networks stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia suddenly disintegrated, cutting off the flow of bronze, grain, and luxury goods that sustained elite power. For centuries, historians searched for a single explanation: invasion, rebellion, technological failure. But no single enemy, weapon, or political decision fits the sheer scale and geographic spread of the destruction. Modern research paints a far more complex and unsettling picture, one rooted in environmental catastrophe. Paleoclimate evidence from pollen samples, lake sediments, tree rings, and isotope analysis reveals a prolonged period of severe drought across the Near East and Eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. This was not a short-term disruption, but a sustained climatic shift that fundamentally altered the region's agricultural potential. Rainfall declined dramatically, rivers weakened, harvests failed year after year. Agricultural systems that had supported dense populations and centralized states for centuries began to collapse under mounting pressure. Food shortages spread rapidly, triggering inflation, unrest, and population decline. As surplus grain disappeared, trade networks collapsed, leaving cities increasingly isolated. Political authority weakened as rulers could no longer guarantee food, security, or stability. And when food disappears, order soon follows. Egyptian records described waves of mysterious attackers known as the Sea Peoples. For decades, they were portrayed as ruthless invaders responsible for widespread destruction. Yet many scholars now interpret them differently, as displaced populations driven from their homelands by drought and famine. Drought turned farmers into refugees, refugees turned into raiders, conflict became unavoidable. The Bronze Age world did not collapse from a single blow, but from cascading failures, environmental stress triggering economic breakdown, social unrest, mass migration, and ultimately systemic collapse. An interconnected system pushed beyond its ecological limits shattered, leaving behind a dark age that would last for centuries. The Maya's fatal dependence when rain becomes a foe. Hidden beneath dense jungle canopies lie the ruins of the classic Maya civilization, towering pyramids rising above the trees, elaborate temples aligned with celestial movements, and stone monuments carved with astonishing mathematical and astronomical precision. These remnants speak of a society that once mastered timekeeping, architecture, and ritual power in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. For generations, scholars were deeply puzzled. How could a civilization so advanced in mathematics, engineering, and astronomy simply abandon its cities and ceremonial centers? The answer was not ignorance, it was dependence. Modern scientific research has revealed a crucial vulnerability at the heart of the Maya civilization. Studies of lake sediments, cave stalagmites, and isotope records across the Yucatan Peninsula show repeated and prolonged droughts between the 8th and 9th centuries CE, precisely the period when many major Maya cities began to decline and were ultimately abandoned. These were not brief dry spells, but sustained climatic disruptions that severely strained the region's fragile ecosystem. Rainfall patterns became dangerously unpredictable. Some years brought extreme drought, drying reservoirs and fields. Other years saw intense rainfall and flooding, eroding soil and destroying crops. The delicate balance that sustained Maya agriculture, finely tuned to seasonal rains, collapsed. Unlike river-based civilizations, such as those of Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Maya had no great rivers to rely on. Their survival depended almost entirely on rainfall and carefully managed water storage systems. When the rains failed, there were few alternatives. As droughts intensified, harvests declined. Food shortages spread through urban centers. Malnutrition weakened populations, increasing vulnerability to disease and unrest. Political legitimacy eroded as rulers, believed to mediate between gods and people, failed to restore balance or divine favor. Instead of fundamentally adapting their systems, Maya elites largely doubled down on tradition. Monumental construction continued, rituals grew more elaborate. Competition between city-states escalated into warfare as resources became scarce. Social rigidity became fatal. Cities emptied as populations dispersed into smaller, more sustainable settlements. Temples fell silent. Stone was slowly reclaimed by the jungle. The collapse of the classic Maya civilization reveals a brutal truth. Intelligence and knowledge alone do not guarantee survival. Without flexibility and adaptation, even the most brilliant societies can be undone when the environment turns against them. The icy grip of the Roman Empire, climate shocks, and imperial strain. The fall of the Roman Empire is most often explained through corruption, invasion, and political decay. Images of barbarian armies, crumbling institutions, and weakened emperors dominate the narrative. Yet beneath these dramatic events lay a quieter, deeply destabilizing force, one that steadily eroded the foundations of imperial power: climate. From the 3rd century onward, climatic conditions across the Roman world became increasingly unstable. Scientific evidence drawn from tree ring studies, ice core samples, and volcanic records points to a period of cooler temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns, commonly associated with what historians describe as the late antique Little Ice Age. These changes were subtle at first, but their long-term effects proved devastating. Shorter growing seasons reduced agricultural productivity across much of the empire. Grain yields declined, placing enormous strain on cities that depended on regular food imports to sustain their massive populations. As shortages became more frequent, prices rose, tax revenues fell, and the imperial economy weakened. Supplying and paying Rome's vast military machine became increasingly difficult, undermining border security and internal stability. At the same time, climate stress beyond Rome's frontiers triggered widespread population movements. Communities in northern and eastern Europe faced harsher winters, failed harvests, and shrinking resources. Many of the groups traditionally labeled as barbarians were not invading out of ambition, but migrating in search of survival, fleeing famine and environmental collapse. But Rome was already fragile. Political instability, recurring civil wars, devastating disease outbreaks, and military overextension had stretched the empire thin. Climate shocks acted as a force multiplier, amplifying existing weaknesses and transforming long-standing strain into irreversible breakdown. Borders became harder to defend, alliances fractured, authority eroded. Environmental pressure did not destroy the Roman Empire on its own, but it accelerated its decline at a critical moment. An empire built on expansion, control, and stability ultimately confronted a force it could neither conquer nor command. The climate did not obey Rome, and Rome could not survive without it. Lessons from the dust: why these stories matter today. Across continents and across centuries, a haunting and unmistakable pattern emerges from the ruins of fallen civilizations. Societies flourish during long periods of environmental stability. With predictable seasons and reliable resources, they grow larger, more complex, and increasingly interconnected. Specialization increases, trade expands, political and economic systems become tightly interwoven. But when climate systems shift, suddenly or over generations, that very complexity transforms into fragility. Food systems are often the first to fail. Crops suffer as rainfall becomes erratic and temperatures shift beyond familiar ranges. Trade networks collapse when surplus disappears. Social trust erodes as governments and leaders struggle to respond to shortages and instability. Migration increases as people are forced to move in search of survival. And as resources grow scarce, conflict almost inevitably follows. These ancient collapses are not distant curiosities or academic footnotes. They are warnings written in stone, ash, and abandoned cities. Today, we live in a globally interconnected civilization more complex and interdependent than any before it. Our food systems span continents. Our supply chains rely on precise timing. Our cities depend on stable infrastructure and predictable climate patterns. Yet extreme weather events, prolonged droughts, devastating floods, rising temperatures, and intense heat waves are becoming increasingly frequent across the world. The question is no longer whether climate can shape the course of history. It is whether we have learned enough from the past to respond differently, with foresight, adaptability, and resilience. Because beneath layers of ruins and dust lies a simple, uncomfortable truth. Nature does not negotiate. It adapts and demands that we do the same. The empires may be forgotten, but their message remains. Are we listening? Empires rise, empires fall, but history never truly disappears. It waits, buried beneath stone, dust, and forgotten names, for those willing to listen. If you want to uncover the hidden truths of the medieval world and beyond, this is Medieval Archive. Subscribe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the past.